Hello everybody and welcome to chapter 11 of the book of Bereishit as we continue to travel through Tanach together. Chapter 11 has 32 verses and in the Koren Saks Chumash it's found at the bottom of page 66 and 67. As we see at the start of this chapter, the descendants of Noach have remained up until now a single people with a single language and culture for 10 generations. They've settled in the valley of Shinar, and we see that they are trying to build a city with a tower which is going to reach to the top, to the heavens. And so our chapter is going to start with the story of the Tower of Bavel, and Hashem is going to prevent them from completing their project by confusing their languages and scattering them across the face of the earth. Then the chapter will shift to a detailed genealogy from Shem all the way to Avram, marking the transition from universal history to the beginnings of the Jewish story. And with that, we will conclude Parshas Noach. So with that in mind, let's start together, chapter 11, verse 1. Vayihi chol haaretz safa echas. The whole world spoke the same language, one language, dvarim achadim, and the same words. Verse 2. Vayihi b'nasa'am mikedem. As the people migrated from the east, Vayimsu vikar be'eretz Shinar. They found a valley in the land of Shinar. Vayeshvu sham, and they settled there. Verse 3. Vayomru ish el reyehu. They said to each other, Hava nilbana levenim. Come, let us make bricks. V'nisrafa lisrefa, and let us bake them thoroughly. Vatehi lahem halavena la'aven. And they used bricks for stone. V'hachema haya lahem lachomer. And they used tar for the cement. Verse 4, Vayomaru, and they said, Hava nivne lanu ir umigdal. Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, v'rosha bashamayim, the top of which will reach the heavens. V'naseh lanu shem, and let us make a name for ourselves. Penafutz al penei chol haaretz, in case we will be scattered across the face of the earth. Fascinatingly, we reach a point in human history where the people were concerned that there was going to be another flood-like catastrophe. They were expecting it, and so this apparently was one of their ways of trying to prevent it. Verse 5, Vayered Adonai leros ha'sa'ir ve'es ha'migdal. Hashem came down to see the city and the tower, asher banu b'nei ha'adam, that the people were building. Verse 6, Vayomer Adonai, and Hashem said, Hein am echad v'safa achas lechulam v'zeh hachilam la'asos. If as one people, with one language, they have begun to do this, nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Verse 7, let us go down and confuse their language, so that one will not understand the speech of another. Verse 8, Vayafetz Adonai osam misham al penei chol haaretz. From there the Lord scattered them all over the earth. Vayachtulu livnos ha'ir, and they abandoned the building of the city. Verse 9, Al kain korah shema Bavel. That is why it is called Bavel, Babel. Kisham balal Adonai safas kol haaretz. Because it was there that Hashem confused the language of all the earth. Umisham hefitzam Adonai al penei kol haaretz. And from there, Hashem scattered them across the face of the earth. So those nations that we read about in chapter 10, that is where they are now being scattered across the face of the earth. Verse 10, now we transition to talk about the generations of Shem. Eile toldos Shem, these are the descendants of Shem. Shem ben Ma'as Shana vayoled es Arpachshad. Shem was 100 years old. He had a son, Arpachshad. Shnasayim achar hamarbul, which happened 2 years after the flood. Vaychi Shem acharei holido es Arpachshad 500 shana. After Arpachshad was born, Shem lived for 500 years. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. Verse 12. Va'arpachshad chai 35 shana. Arpachshad lived for 35 years. Vayoled es Shalach, and then he had Shalach. Verse 13. Vayechi Arpachshad acharei holido es Shelach. The lifespan of Arpachshad after he fathered Shelach, Shalosh shanim va'abar meos shana, was 403 years. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. Verse 14. V'Shelach chai 30 shana. Shelach lived for 30 years. Vayoled es Aver, and he had Aver. Vayechi Shelach acharei holido es Aver, Shalosh shanim va'arba meos shana. For 403 years. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. Vayichi Ever, arba'u shloshim shana. Ever lived for 34 years. Vayoled es Peleg, and he had a son, Peleg. Vayichi Ever acharei holido es Peleg, and after Ever fathered Peleg, he lived for shlosh shana va'arba meos shana. He lived for 430 years. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. He Peleg shloshim shana. Peleg lived for 30 years. Vayoled es Re'u, and he had a son, Re'u. Vayichi Peleg acharei holido es Re'u, and after giving birth to Re'u, he lived for another Teisha shanim umasayim shana, for 209 years. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. Verse 21. Vayichi Re'u shtaimu shloshim shana. Re'u lived for 32 years. Vayoled es Serug, and he had a son, Serug. Verse 21. Vayichi Re'u acharei holido es Serug. After fathering Serug, he lived for another Sheva shanim umasayim shana, for 207 years. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. Verse 22. Vayichi Serug shloshim shana. Serug lived for 30 years. Vayoled es Nachor, and he had a son, Nachor. Vayichi Serug acharei holido es Nachor masayim shana. Serug lived for another 200 years after Nachor. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. Verse 24. Vayichi Nachor teisha ve'esrim shana. Nachor lived for 29 years. Vayoled es Tarach, and he had a son, Terach. Vayichi Nachor acharei holido es Terach tisha esrei shana uma'as shana. After Terach was born, Nachor lived for 119 years. Vayoled banim uvanos, and he had other sons and daughters. Vayichi Serach shivim shana, and Terach lived for 70 years. Vayoled es Avram, es Nachor, ve'es Haran, and he had Avram, and Nachor, and Haran, which shows us that Avram was alive at the time of the Tower of Babel. And there are some fascinating midrashim and some incredible stories about Avraham in these formative years before we eventually encounter his first conversation with Hashem at the start of the next chapter. Verse 27, Ve'ele toldos Terach, these are the descendants of Terach. Terach holid es Avram, es Nachor, ve'es Haran. Terach was the father of Avram, Nachor, and Haran. V'Haran holid es Lot. And Haran had a son, Lot. Vayamas Haran al panei Terach aviv, and Haran died while his father Terach was still alive. Be'eretz moladato be'ur kasdim, and he died in the land of his birth, which was Ur Kasdim. Verse 29. Vayikach Avram v'Nachor lahem nashim. Avram and Nachor married wives. Shem Eshes Avram Sarai. The wife of Avram was Sarai. And Avram is later going to be known as Avraham. Sarai is later going to be known as Sarah. V'shem Eshes Nachor Milcah bas Haran, and the wife of Nachor was Milcah, the daughter of Haran. Avi Milcah v'Avi Yiscah, who was the father of Milcah and the father of Yiscah. And Yiscah is another name for Sarah. And our rabbis point out that the reason why she is given this name as well, Yiscah, is because the root of this name is connected to the same word as having prophetic vision. So it's a way of alluding to Sarah's prophetic abilities. Vatahi Sarai akara, and Sarai was barren. Ein la valad. She had no child. Of course, that will change in the coming chapters as she eventually gives birth to Yitzchak, but at this point in time, the Torah is telling us that she was not able at this point to be able to have a child. Vayikach Terach es Avram beno, and Terach took his son Avram, ve'es Lot ben Haran ben beno, and his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, ve'es Sarai kalaso, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, Eshes Avram beno, the wife of his son Avram, vayetzu itam me'ur kasdim laleches artza Canaan. And together they set out from Ur Kasdim to head towards the land of Canaan. Vayavo ad Haran. They only got as far as Haran. Vayeshvu sham, and that is where they settled. And finally, verse 32, Vayihiyu yemei Serach. Terach lived for Chamesh shanim umasayim shana, for 205 years. Vayamas Terach becharan, and Terach died in Haran. And that concludes chapter 11 of the book of Bereishit, and that concludes the end of Parshas Noach. So Mazel Tov, we've now completed Parshas Bereishit together as well as Noach. And we'll continue next time with chapter 12, which is the start of Parshas Lech Lecha, where we will start to get in to the story of Abraham and the formation of the Jewish nation. But until then, I wish you a wonderful and meaningful day.